This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one country, one leader, or one protest. What you're watching is something quieter and far more dangerous. It's a system that has crossed a line it cannot easily step back from. A moment where warnings become commitments, where visibility replaces deniability, and where violence, once threatened out loud, starts changing behavior on every side. Nothing here is accidental. Not the timing, not the language, not the sudden urgency from people who usually speak in abstractions. Because once a powerful system signals that it might intervene, even conditionally, every actor underneath it recalculates. People push further, authorities clamp harder, and exits begin to disappear. If you're still watching, that matters. Because understanding this early is the only advantage anyone gets. Stay with me. Because to understand why this moment is so volatile, you first have to understand what actually controls the system now. What actually controls the system now is not authority, not legitimacy, not even force. It's credibility under observation. Power used to move quietly. Signals were private. Threats were deniable. And violence could be managed in the dark. That world is gone. Today, the system is governed by who is believed and who is being watched in real time. When warnings are issued publicly, they stop being diplomacy. They become contracts, not written, but witnessed. Every statement becomes a lever. Every pause becomes a message. Every casualty becomes evidence. This is why personalities no longer matter. What matters is the machinery underneath them. A machine that rewards escalation once credibility is placed on the table, because once one side signals it might act, the other side can't afford restraint without looking weak. And once restraint disappears, speed takes over. That's the trap. And it didn't form overnight. It formed slowly. So slowly, most people didn't notice the shift happening at all. The most dangerous changes never announce themselves. They normalize. There was a time when internal violence stayed internal, when crackdowns happened behind closed borders, when information moved slower than force. That time mattered because it gave systems room to de-escalate, to deny, to delay, to quietly step back. Now compare that to what exists today. Violence is visible instantly. Warnings are issued publicly, and information moves faster than decisions. Before, control came from isolation. Now, isolation creates suspicion. Before, silence protected power. Now, silence confirms guilt. This shift didn't come from one law or one event. It came from repetition, from technology quietly rerouting attention, from audiences learning to watch systems instead of statements. And once that shift locked in, something critical changed. Restraint stopped looking like stability. It started looking like weakness. That's when slow change becomes lethal. Because systems designed for opacity collapse under exposure, and they almost always respond the same way, with force. Then the numbers start appearing, not slogans. Not speculation. Counts, dozens of people dead. Some of them not even adults. And at the same time, a startling number of enforcers killed as well. That detail matters more than it seems. Because when a state loses people and its own security forces lose people at nearly the same rate, something fundamental has shifted. The monopoly on violence is no longer clean. Control is no longer cheap. Fear is no longer one-directional. This isn't chaos, it's friction. The kind of friction that appears when a system built on intimidation suddenly faces resistance it didn't price in. And the response to friction is almost always the same. Tighter laws, harsher punishment, no leniency, not to restore order, but to send a message. If you're still watching, notice what's happening here. Because these deaths aren't the crisis. They're the indicator. They signal that the cost of repression is rising faster than expected. And when costs rise inside a system already under pressure, leaders don't slow down. They double down. Which brings us to the part you were never meant to see. how control actually functions when force isn't enough. Here's what actually keeps the system running. Not ideology, not speeches, not fear, cash flow. Every security unit, every courtroom decision, every surveillance order, they all depend on a constant stream of money moving upward and loyalty moving downward. When that flow is uninterrupted, repression is sustainable. When it slows, cracks appear immediately. This is why force is paired with legal absolutism. Why punishment is made certain? Why compromise disappears? The system is buying time, because the moment revenue becomes unstable, enforcement becomes negotiable. And once enforcement is negotiable, control collapses fast. This is where people misunderstand power. They think it comes from weapons. It doesn't. It comes from paying the people who carry them. That's why economic pressure isn't a side effect here. It's the mechanism. And when pressure builds at the financial core of a system like this, leaders face a brutal choice: reduce force and risk defection, or increase force and accelerate collapse. Either way, the clock starts ticking faster, which is why the next shock doesn't unfold slowly. It arrives all at once. This is where speed takes over. Decisions shorten, language hardens. Moves stop being reversible. Information disappears. Connections go dark. Silence becomes policy. That's not order. That's containment. Because when a system cuts itself off, it's not trying to persuade anyone. It's trying to operate without witnesses. But here's the problem. Darkness no longer guarantees control. Signals leak. Images escape. Proof travels faster than command. So the response intensifies. More force, more certainty, more punishment, not because it's working, but because stopping would admit vulnerability. And once a system chooses total pressure, it eliminates its own off-ramps. Every action commits it further. Every hour narrows the future. This is the phase where leaders stop managing outcomes and start managing consequences. They're no longer asking how to stabilize. They're asking how to survive the next day intact. That's why this moment feels unstable, because the machinery is moving too fast to steer and too exposed to hide. And the next phase doesn't hit institutions first. It hits people. This is where you enter the system, not as a spectator, not as an observer, but as a variable, because when escalation removes off-ramps, it doesn't just trap leaders, it traps everyone underneath them. You feel it in ordinary decisions, whether to leave the house, whether to speak, whether to trust silence more than movement. When laws promise no leniency, hesitation disappears. Fear becomes binary, and survival turns into calculation. This is why repression doesn't restore calm. It radicalizes it. Because when consequences are guaranteed either way, people stop optimizing for safety and start optimizing for meaning. That's the human cost systems never model correctly. And it's why visibility matters so much. Why being seen changes behavior. Why knowing the world is watching can feel like the last thin layer of protection left. If you're still here, don't look away yet. Because what's happening to people on the ground doesn't stay contained. Pressure always travels. And when it does, it crosses borders faster than anyone expects. This is the moment it stops being local, because pressure doesn't respect borders. It follows systems. Information moves outward. Markets react. Allies recalibrate. What looked like an internal crackdown starts triggering external consequences. Diplomatic tension, economic exposure, strategic positioning, not because anyone planned it that way, but because visibility forces alignment. When violence is seen, neutrality becomes harder to maintain. When commitments are made publicly, silence becomes a position. And when credibility is at stake, distance stops being protection. This is how internal instability becomes international risk. Every outside actor now has to ask the same question: if this system collapses or hardens, what does that do to us? That uncertainty spreads faster than policy can respond. And once uncertainty enters global systems, it compounds. Supply chains hesitate. Currencies react. Security postures shift. Nothing explodes yet. But everything starts leaning, and when enough systems lean at the same time, the future stops looking like a straight line. It starts branching, which is where we're heading next. From here, the system doesn't stabilize. It accelerates, but acceleration doesn't mean one outcome. It means divergence. There are three paths. The first is adjustment. Pressure forces, limited concessions. Violence drops just enough to slow escalation. The system survives, but weaker, more brittle, more watched than before. The second is erosion. No single collapse, just sustained pressure, economic strain, legitimacy decay, control maintained but at rising cost until something essential gives way quietly. And then there's rupture. That's the path no one announces, where one trigger, financial, institutional, or kinetic breaks synchronization, where loyalty fractures faster than authority can respond, and where control disappears not gradually, but all at once. Here's what matters. None of these paths are chosen deliberately. They're produced by momentum, by decisions already made, by threats already issued, by visibility that can't be undone. That's why prediction fails here, because the system is no longer deciding what it wants. It's reacting to what it's already set in motion. And the final direction won't be obvious until it's irreversible. Which brings us to the last question. What happens when no one is willing or able to stop the machine? This is not the part where everything resolves, because systems like this don't end cleanly. They exhaust themselves, or they break something on the way down. What matters now isn't intent, it's inertia. Too many lines have been drawn publicly, too much has been seen, too much credibility is on the table for easy retreat. And once the system reaches that point, the danger isn't collapse. The danger is continuation. Continuation without off-ramps, without silence, without room to pause. That's how moments turn historic. Not because someone wanted history, but because no one could slow it down anymore. If you stop watching stories like this halfway through, you miss the turn. The moment when pressure becomes momentum, when warning becomes consequence. So don't treat this as an ending. Treat it as a marker, because whatever happens next won't arrive as breaking news. It will arrive as a shift you only recognize in hindsight. If you want to understand how systems cross that line and what comes after, stay with me. The next chapter starts before anyone admits we're already in it.